General Hospital spoilers tease that Jocelyn is gradually falling into a nightmare that even in the worst-case scenarios, she never imagined. A chain of events starts from what seemed like an innocuous act, but it has consequences far beyond her control. It all began with an essay, a seemingly simple academic task. Personal and harmless, but when Emma, her close friend whom Jocelyn once trusted completely, altered its content without warning, the boundaries between right and wrong, personal and institutional, private and political became blurred. Behind those seemingly innocent words was a layer of sophisticated encrypted information. A manipulation of content cleverly disguised that only those truly familiar with the organization they work for could recognize how dangerously lethal it was. And now, even though she didn't touch the code, didn't write any of the altered parts, Jocelyn is the one who must face the consequences, as her name is tied to the tampered file, which is spreading and being stored on a closely monitored system. Every gesture she makes is being watched, every brief glance exchanged in the hallways, every step she takes in the library. Even private messages are being collected by the system as if they were part of an unnamed, unregulated internal investigation that covers every inch of her life. Those at the top, figures hidden behind frosted glass, are starting to doubt her, not because of any solid evidence, but because of her position, her past relationship with Emma. And because her name appeared just as things started to get blurry. In the shadows, Jocelyn can feel the punishment being mapped out step by step, not through public interrogation, but through her gradual isolation, through the eroding of trust in her, through the way those who once stood by her side begin to turn away, to keep their distance, to grow cautious. The more she tries to understand what's really happening, the more she feels as if she's swimming upstream in a murky underground stream, where every step forward only causes her to lose more trust in her former closest friend. Emma is no longer the passionate and empathetic girl Jocelyn once confided in. Emma has become mysterious, cold, unpredictable, and almost unrecognizable, no longer aware of her own boundaries. Emma's behavioral changes, the lowered gaze, the double-edged remarks, the spontaneous decisions no one can understand, have all created a dense fog around their relationship. Jocelyn begins to wonder if Emma is doing this out of a desire to help, for some ideal, or for a cold calculation hidden behind her sweet exterior. Every conversation now feels like a battle of wits, a tense exchange, a probing into each other's thoughts in a suffocating space where Jocelyn feels like she's suffocating, like living in a glass cage where every movement is recorded, analyzed, and interpreted in a way that works against her. The danger is no longer an abstract concept. It has become real, concrete, and clear, clinging to her like a shadow she can't escape. She feels it when she walks down the empty hall, hears the door close behind her, sees the red light flashing signaling that the camera is still on, even though no one speaks. The small details in the essay, a section that was edited, a document that was replaced, a quote that doesn't match, are now evidence being dissected word by word, as if it were a map leading to a larger conspiracy. She can no longer trust anyone, she doesn't know if anyone is truly on her side. Jocelyn feels herself being pushed out of every circle of trust, as if the entire system is operating coldly to eliminate her without any formal accusations. Emma, once a place of sympathy for Jocelyn, is now the center of a chaos Jocelyn can't predict the extent of. Jocelyn has no choice but to face it, not to save a friend, but to save herself from being drowned by the consequences caused by others. But how do you escape a maze when every corner is rigged with surveillance? How do you expose the truth when even accurate memories are being questioned, when lies are programmed so skillfully as part of the system? Jocelyn believes the answer lies in the very lines of the text that were altered, the periods, the commas, the code hidden quietly in the original file, things that seemed invisible but could reveal who manipulated everything. Until she finds that key, Jocelyn will continue to live in this obsession, a haunting not from the outside world but from the very place she once called home, from the person she once called friend. And that's the scariest part, when the destroyer of trust isn't the enemy, but the one who once stood beside her in her most vulnerable moments. Jocelyn is no longer just a small part of the complex network she once thought she understood. She is now at the center of an unprecedented crisis, Where not only Emma, the one who was once close and familiar, turns her back on her with coldness and calculation. But even the leaders of the system like Dalton and Brennan start to view her as a real threat. No longer are there vague warnings, metaphorical questions, or insinuating glances. Now, every look, every instruction, and every decision is focused on Jocelyn with one sole purpose: to control, isolate, and if necessary, eliminate her. Dalton, who once presented a calm and encouraging front, has now transformed into a hard and unyielding version, no longer trusting Jocelyn even a fraction as he did before. In his eyes, she is no longer a trainee to be mentored, but an unpredictable variable, a person carrying too much risk to be kept within the tightly controlled system. And Brennan, with his subtle but cold strategic power, no longer needs to say much to show that he sees Jocelyn as a danger that needs to be locked away, not because of what she's done, but because of what she could uncover if she's allowed to continue existing in this space. Both of them see in her a freedom they can't control, an intelligence they can't manipulate, and most importantly, a hunger for the truth they can't stop with simple prohibitions. This crazy adjustment is no longer just an internal punishment, it's beginning to take the shape of a purge. Jocelyn is no longer being judged by specific actions, she's been assigned a dangerous identity. She is no longer a person, but a symbol of deviance, of the risk of spreading doubts and truths the system once buried forever. New impositions are starting to appear, boundaries built around her, areas she's banned from entering, tasks taken away, meetings she's excluded from for no reason. Those who once greeted her now avoid her, former allies now act indifferent and cold. She doesn't need anyone to speak out loud to know she's being surrounded from all sides by an underground network tightening every day, every hour. And it's in this context that Jocelyn begins to realize that what makes her dangerous isn't a specific wrongdoing, but her ability to make others uneasy just by daring to ask questions. By daring not to believe in a system built for everyone to meekly obey. She embodies what Dalton and Brennan hate the most, an uncontrollable factor. She doesn't react as they predict. She doesn't succumb to pressure, and most importantly, she doesn't crumble when pushed to the edge. Every step she takes, though limited, still carries a defiant energy. She doesn't rebel through violence, but through cold perseverance, through a look that's ready to face them, through remembering every detail, every glance, every small change in the behavior of those around her. And it's this danger, not in her actions but in her essence, that is making the system start to adjust itself. A strong transformation is taking place just beneath the surface that no one will openly admit, new regulations being rewritten, security procedures being tightened, secret meetings happening more often, all just to deal with one individual, Jocelyn. She embodies a type of danger no one can smother with a report or a phone call. She's the variant they have no immunity to. And as the system begins to retract in defense, it's the clearest proof that Jocelyn is no longer just the target of exclusion, but has become a force making those who once seemed invincible readjust their entire strategy. This battle is no longer about a tampered essay. No longer about the relationship with Emma, it's about the existence of an individual who can change the entire way this organization operates. Jocelyn is no longer just the central character. She's the biggest concern for those at the top of the system, not because she's dangerous, but because she proves that the truth, when placed in the right hands, can become the sharpest weapon of all, shaking the very foundations they thought unshakable. And the real battle, the one between an individual carrying reason and a massive machine built on lies, has only just begun. In the darkest moment of her life, when Jocelyn thought she had been completely isolated within a labyrinth of hidden agendas, when Brennan's suspicious glances increasingly surrounded her, and Dalton no longer concealed his intention to eliminate her from any opportunity to access power within the organization. It was Vaughn who unexpectedly appeared like a ray of light cutting through the thick darkness. No one called for him, nor was anyone expecting his arrival, but with just a glance, a simple action of standing by Jocelyn's side at her most vulnerable moment, Vaughn made the entire atmosphere tremble. He didn't need to say much, didn't need to explain where he came from, and wasn't in a hurry to reveal any secrets, because his very presence was enough to cause a new adjustment, a subtle movement that shook the entire system Jocelyn was sinking into. Vaughn wasn't just some stranger acting out of chivalry. From the very first moment, he carried a strange energy, confident but not arrogant, calm but sharp. With a gaze that could both reassure and make others wary. He acted as though he had been watching everything for a long time. As if he had stood outside long enough to understand exactly who was who in this game, and now, it was his turn to step in at the precise moment Jocelyn was about to lose everything. While Brennan and Dalton were trying to isolate her with cold disciplinary procedures, turning her into a name that needed to be erased from the roster to prevent the spread of a deviant threat. Vaughn placed himself between Jocelyn and the blade the organization was quietly sharpening. And that was when everything started to change. This new adjustment, brought by Vaughn, quickly made those who thought they controlled the entire situation feel uneasy. Jocelyn was no longer alone. She was no longer an easy target for isolation and manipulation. A new force stood by her side, but what no one, not even Jocelyn, could anticipate was that Vaughn wasn't completely unrelated to her complicated past. The haunting truth began to peel back layer by layer. Vaughn was Dex's half-brother, the man who had once shattered Jocelyn's heart, who had been both a sweet and painful memory, and who had left her with a wound that still hadn't healed. When this truth was confirmed, it sent shockwaves not only through Jocelyn's heart but also through the very system that was monitoring her. People like Brennan and Dalton seized the opportunity to exploit that connection, using it as leverage to increase the pressure on Jocelyn, to legitimize their suspicions of her. Now, she was not just a person suspected of independence and defiance. But she was linked to a dangerous bloodline, a family relationship the organization had never approved. Dex, even though he had left the system, was still a name marked in the red files, a figure with a murky past, once suspected of betrayal, and who had shaken the trust of the higher-ups. And now, Vaughn, the one who shared the same blood as Dex, had entered to protect Jocelyn, making every investigation, every plan to control her more urgent than ever. Internally, Jocelyn was in chaos. She didn't know how to feel about Vaughn. He was clearly the one protecting her, the one who had extended his hand just as she was about to drown. But how could she trust someone whose past was tied to the one who had hurt her most? How could she lower her guard with someone who shared the same blood as Dex? The name alone made her heart ache. Vaughn might be telling the truth, acting with good intentions. But he could also be the next pawn brought in at the right moment to break apart the fragile system of trust she was desperately holding onto. From Vaughn's side, the struggle wasn't any easier. He didn't come here to rekindle the past, nor to replace Dex in reclaiming something that had been lost. But the truth remained, he was Dex's brother, and no matter how much he tried to hide it, that fact could easily be used against him as an excuse for the most powerful figures to eliminate Jocelyn in a way that seemed reasonable. He knew that. He also knew that every step he took closer to her, every word he spoke to her, would be recorded, analyzed, and sooner or later twisted into a series of behaviors to be condemned. Yet, he stayed. Standing in the middle of a minefield, for one reason only: he knew Jocelyn didn't deserve the relentless pursuit she was facing. However, as those around them began to reveal their true nature, Vaughn, with his hidden bloodline, unintentionally became a new factor of disaster. No one could predict what Vaughn's staying would lead to, a rescue or a destruction. In a system where every relationship is a potential weakness to be exploited, blood relations no longer served as sacred connections but as the biggest cracks ready to be pierced at any moment. And Jocelyn, once again, had to choose between trusting someone who could be her savior, or bracing for the shock if this time, this appearance was just the prelude to another betrayal. A new disaster was quietly approaching, not with the sound of gunshots or a direct order for pursuit, but through unhealed memories, through names stacking up in secret files. And through a truth no one dared admit: sometimes, the person who comes to save you brings with them the fuse that will make everything explode uncontrollably. And Jocelyn, the girl who once believed she was strong enough to face any truth, now stood at the fragile boundary between trust and total collapse. Jocelyn was reaching the absolute limit of her endurance. Recent days had turned her into a different version of herself, the girl who had once been strong, who had trusted her instincts, who had dared face injustice, now found herself standing in a maze with no way out, where every step was watched, every word analyzed, and every breath controlled. The pressures from above, Dalton's ruthless decisions, Brennan's cold elimination strategy, Emma's quiet betrayal, had accumulated into a heavy darkness, leaving Jocelyn with no foundation in the organization to which she had once devoted both her youth and her trust. Each passing day, she felt herself eroded bit by bit. Not through bullets or physical torture, but by the feeling of being doubted, isolated, and painted as a threat that needed to be erased. Vaughn's arrival had once been the final glimmer of hope, allowing Jocelyn to fight through it all. He was the only one who didn't need evidence, who didn't require an excuse, yet still stood before her when the world turned its back. But since the truth about his relationship with Dex had been revealed, Vaughn was no longer her absolute shield. Both of them, despite trying to stay calm, realized they had become living targets in a silent purging campaign unfolding behind the scenes. All the support Vaughn once had was being cut off piece by piece, his communications disrupted, his access rapidly restricted, as if the organization wanted to erase his influence before he could do anything out of their control. Jocelyn was no better, a secret meeting, an internal memo, a series of behavioral adjustments, all leading to one conclusion: she was no longer allowed to exist within the structure they had once expected her to obey. And when both Vaughn and Jocelyn realized that there was no longer any way to stay without sacrificing their integrity or ideals, the painful yet inevitable decision was made. They would leave General Hospital, without notice, without waiting for permission, with no hope of improvement. The simultaneous departure of the two of them sent shockwaves through the deepest layers of the organization. This wasn't just two individuals resigning, this was a silent declaration that the system was rotting from within, that loyalty no longer had value unless it came with absolute obedience. That conscience had become secondary in a mechanism driven by fear and domination. The madness that was unfolding was clear proof that things had gone too far to be salvaged. No one could control the direction of the game anymore. Characters who were once pillars had now become the ones to break the order. The departure of Jocelyn and Vaughn didn't bring everything back to stability, it only accelerated the collapse, because if two people who had once believed in the system, who had fought from within to improve it, were forced to let go, it was undeniable proof that the system had failed. Those left in the organization could continue to play their roles as if nothing had happened, could bury Jocelyn and Vaughn's files, could replace them with others who knew how to stay silent and obey, but the cracks had formed, and they were spreading by the hour. People like Brennan could declare this as a necessary cleansing. But the silent observers, those still recording every event, they knew this was a warning signal. A transformation, a violent turn was coming. And Jocelyn, though leaving in silence, left a profound mark, a reminder that in a world where obedience is the law, purposeful departure is the greatest act of rebellion. Jocelyn and Vaughn's story didn't end with a farewell, but with a resounding echo that forced the entire structure to reflect on itself. In the chaos disguised as false order, they chose to walk with their heads held high, eyes not lowered, hands not trembling. And though the future ahead was uncertain, at least they were no longer part of the system that had lost its conscience. They left. But their presence remained, as a scratch on what seemed to be perfect glass, as a crack, no matter how small, that would spread if no one dared to repair it from within. And so, one of the biggest shocks at GH was officially confirmed: the two most dangerous people, not because they destroyed, but because they saw the truth, voluntarily walked out the door, leaving behind an organization struggling to hide things that could no longer be buried. Carly had never been the type of person to stand idly by when her daughter was in danger. No matter how many years passed, no matter how much Jocelyn had grown into a strong, independent woman who could stand firm in the harshest situations, to Carly, Jocelyn would always be the child who needed to be protected from the dark forces that could devour her at any moment. And now, when the ominous clouds were gathering around her daughter, when Jocelyn was caught in a whirlwind of conspiracy, betrayal, and internal purging from the very place she had once trusted, Carly had no choice but to act. This protection would no longer come from sudden bursts of rage or open threats, but from a new, haunting adjustment, an underground, silent yet calculated campaign carried out by the woman who had once confronted the most dangerous forces and always knew where to strike to inflict the most damage. Carly understood that the current system was trying to choke her daughter with power, procedures, and policies. They didn't need to physically kill Jocelyn, they only needed to drain her trust. Wear down her spirit, and make her doubt everything, even herself. And because Carly understood how this system worked, she chose not to follow the same old path. She didn't make noise. She didn't confront directly. Instead, Carly began gathering information, expanding her connections, quietly inserting herself into every crack in the system to stir things up from the inside. Every move Carly made was a clear statement. She would not let anyone turn her daughter into a sacrificial pawn for their cruel power games. This protection was now tinged with deep obsession. Because Carly wasn't just facing a specific enemy but an entire mechanism designed to erase individuals who stepped outside the boundaries they set. And in the midst of it all, another change was quietly unfolding, not initiated by Carly, but one that brought consequences she couldn't ignore: the relationship between Jocelyn and Vaughn. What had initially been companionship between two individuals pushed to the edge of the system gradually became a connection that transcended normal boundaries. Vaughn wasn't just the one protecting Jocelyn when she was isolated, he was the only one sensitive enough to understand that she needed a partner, not to guide her, but to listen to her and see her for who she truly was. And in that chaotic moment, they found each other, not in peace, but in ruin and rebirth. Vaughn, with his experience and an unnameable loneliness, and Jocelyn, with a heartache yet to heal, had inadvertently merged in an emotional space where neither of them needed to defend themselves anymore. They didn't need to prove anything. They only needed to be present, and in that presence, a new couple slowly formed. But this relationship, no matter how deep, was not immune to scrutiny. Especially when Vaughn carried the bloodline of Dex, the one who had once caused Jocelyn pain, who had abandoned her in the midst of unfinished feelings. For Carly, this was an obsession that couldn't easily be ignored. She couldn't stop Jocelyn's heart from stirring, but she couldn't turn a blind eye to the possibility that her daughter could be hurt again. Carly saw the similarities between Vaughn and Dex, not just in appearance or background, but in the way they entered Jocelyn's life so suddenly, so opportunely, as if it had been arranged. And that made Carly even more cautious. She began digging into Vaughn's past, not to destroy her daughter's relationship, but to understand whether Vaughn was truly trustworthy. Or if he was just another version of Dex with a story retold in a new light. This new romance, though beautiful, was becoming the focal point for another crazy adjustment, not only because it was affecting Jocelyn's personal emotions, but also because it threatened to shatter what Carly was trying to build to protect her daughter. Every time Jocelyn got closer to Vaughn, Carly felt like every effort to regain control was slipping away. Because she knew, there was nothing more vulnerable than placing trust and love at the moment of deepest pain. And if Vaughn was real, it would be a miracle. But if he was part of a bigger game, then Jocelyn would lose everything, perhaps forever. The story was changing every day. Not just because of what was happening on the surface, but because of what was growing in the dark. A mother willing to do anything to protect her child. A young woman caught between honor and emotion, a man carrying someone else's past, trying to rebuild the present with his own truth. And as everything converged, it was the love between Jocelyn and Vaughn, that which seemed like salvation, that might become the seed for an even greater shock, not only for them, but also for Carly, who had never accepted defeat when her daughter's safety was threatened. This was no longer just the story of two individuals in love during a crisis. It was the beginning of a new chapter, where obsession, protection, heartbreak, and rebirth rose simultaneously, and no one, not even Carly, could know what the outcome would be.